the next section of the conversation goes into a lot of detail under the Take Action heading of the toolkit. And Alan Byram from Connect Consulting is here to lead us through that. So Alan, welcome. Thank you.
I've kind of made it my professional mission to pull all these disciplines together. And there are a lot of terms that fly around out there. There's contingency plans, there's business continuity, there's emergency management plan, emergency action plan, disaster recovery plan. You know, what do they all mean? They all kind of mean the same thing. Some of them are directed at various components of the business, but this is my version after having spent many years working with many different types of clients. So we call it business resilience, and it includes those three disciplines that you see. We'll start in the middle because I think that's what comes first. So emergency management planning, we heard prepare, mitigate, respond, and recover. That is the classic emergency management cycle. And that is very important. The first thing you have to do is respond to the emergency. And then you can be worried, once that's been taken care of, then you can focus your attention on how do I recover my business? How do I recover my IT systems and my data, my software? So what's a business resilience plan? You know, it's the process, as Robin said, it's the process that's important. It's not a project, it's a process. When you go through emergency management or business continuity planning, you're in effect requiring that a change in the business or corporate culture take place, or it's not going to be successful. I worked with many clients who've gone through disaster planning or emergency planning. They've got a plan sitting on the shelf, but nobody owns it. Nobody knows what's in it. It's not accurate. So what's the point? If you don't embed this process into your business, make it an active business process like you would budgeting or strategic planning or any of the other key business processes, your odds of success are going to be lower. So there's multiple components here. We've heard a little bit about risk assessment, or what we call hazard vulnerability assessment as well, or HVA. I'm going to show you what that looks like, what was referred to. Business impact analysis. It's the process of identifying internally in the business basically what the core processes are, or what we would call essential functions. What are the critical things that you do, and who does them, and how do they go about that, and where do they go about that? All of the things that go into whether you're manufacturing a product or providing a service, whatever the core delivery, let's say, of your business is, you need to define what the essential functions are that go into that. And you can do it by department, you can follow your org chart, or you simply can do it based on a logical progression of the process. First I buy this, then I break it apart, then I make this, then I sell that, whatever your situation is. And then I like to develop both risk and impact strategies together. So we would identify risk, what are the hazards, what could cause my business to fall down, what could cause that process not to work, what are all the things that could happen, and how big of an event is it? You're answering some basic questions when you get into resiliency planning. So what are we recovering? What are my essential functions? What are my essential assets? Do I own the building? Do I rent the building? Do I own equipment? Do I have vehicles? What's my inventory look like? What am I trying to protect? What am I trying to recover? Next is who is responsible for recovery? Once again, people. If you have a small staff, it might be one or two people who know how to do everything, and you're dependent on their knowledge, but more importantly, you're dependent on their availability. So don't overlook the fact that if I'm having trouble at home, if my home is threatened or not there, or my child's school is gone, or I have elder care I need to attend to, I'm not coming to work. I'm sorry, I love you and I love my job, but I'm not coming to work today. I've got a higher priority of my own. So if you have single points of knowledge or single points of failure inside the business, and that person or that item is not available, you're stuck, you stop. So be aware of that. So how will we recover? If you can answer those questions, and if you can do it in a simple emergency action plan or a simple business resilience plan, I encourage you to do that. We use 5 elements in business resilience. There's people, there's process, there's facility, there's technology, and supply chain. So if you have a plan, or if your plan deals with each of those elements, you're going to be in pretty good shape. All right, so first thing is planning. What's your current state? So you may be an industry that's regulated, a company that's regulated by a federal entity, or maybe you're a member of an organization as part of your the industry that you belong to. Maybe your customers are telling you you must do these things, like the paintbrush manufacturer I just mentioned. So what is your current state of recovery readiness? What would you do today? And then what's your desired state? So remember those questions: who, what, when, where, why. Go through that and understand where you are today and filter it through where I would like to be in a year. And don't underestimate how long it takes to do a really in-depth business continuity, business resiliency plan, or just an HVA if you're a large enough organization. But get started now and get something going. So I like to do a snapshot of what would we do today? How would we recover today? Just so we have something on paper and something that we can exercise and test, which we'll see in a minute. And then work on going back through in more detail to either fill in gaps or expand the information so that it covers every aspect that's important to the business for recovery. So current versus future. Risk assessment: what are your threats and vulnerabilities? We've talked about that. And what are the impacts if those threats occur on those essential functions, on my people, on my process, on my technology, on my facility, on my supply chain? If a wildfire occurs, if a landslide occurs, what could be the potential impact? And so we score those as well, like we do with the HVA, so that I have a working matrix of, oh, here's the risk possibility, my idea of it. Here's the impact if it occurs, and we have a list of scores that say these are the things that we should deal with if we can mitigate them. If we can't mitigate the risk, then we want to create strategies for recovering from them. Once again, people, process, technology, facilities, supply chain. And then document. So collect all of the documents that you can, put them in a binder. It's still old school. I like that. Just be careful where you put it, and be careful what you put in it. If you've got some IT information, like here's the password to my main server, you don't want to distribute that document to just anybody, and you don't want to just leave it in the trunk of your car because it could be stolen. So you want to protect. You have to secure any kind of paper document. The cloud is a decent place as long as you're going to have internet access from wherever you are when you need it. Your own server is great, except when the server goes down. Mobile phone, there are a lot of apps out there that could help you do that, help you store in the cloud. You can access them in multiple ways, including your cell phone. But just be sure that they're cell service, or just be sure that if you really are going to rely on that in order to recover your business, that you have some other means, a mobile hotspot perhaps, or a satellite phone that gives you access to the internet from someplace so that you can recover that plan. It's a difference between if thinking and when thinking. So some companies or people may say, well, if it happens, I'll do this, rather than when it happens, I'll be ready to do this. That's the difference. A little slight different take on how you approach or how you look at the world. Risk assessment. Are we at risk? What are we required to do? What should we do? What can we do? And what will we do? Okay, risk considerations for business continuity, business resilience. I've already said it, but people, process, technology, facility, supply chain. If you can cover those things, you should be in pretty good shape. Meaning, have I identified the risks? Have I identified the impacts? Have I identified strategy for reducing risk and impact, mitigating it? Have I got a strategy for recovering each of these essential functions and elements of my business? If I have that, I'm in decent shape. So identify and quantify the potential impact of disaster outages on your business. Identify and quantify. And I like to link them, as I said, to the risk. So if this risk happens, what's the impact, quantifiable impact, potential impact on these other items, my essential functions, my people, my process, my technology, my supply chain, my facility? What are the potential impacts? Before we move on, a couple of recovery definitions. We're about to get into a little bit of how we go about this. What does that look like? I mentioned it for essential functions. There's a metric, a measurement called maximum tolerable downtime, MTD. That's one. MAO, maximum allowable outage time. That's another one I see. Or MTD is what I use, maximum tolerable downtime for each essential function. So how long can it be gone? How long can it be suspended? How long can it be out of action before it impacts my entire business or the next step of my business or whatever supply chain role or dependency role that essential function plays in the entire business? How long could it be gone? And what would that look like? Then for IT systems, we have one called recovery time objectives. It's the same as MTD, it's just for the IT systems, right? So how long can an RTO, how long can the IT system be gone before it affects my ability to conduct the essential function that is dependent on that IT system? So that's why we want to go through that entire process of identifying people, process, technology, facility, supply chain for my essential functions. Oh, I've got this system. This essential function needs to be back in 8 hours. I have this IT system. If it fails, it could be out for 24 hours or 48 hours. Now, fortunately, these days with cloud access and pretty inexpensive disaster recovery technology that takes place in the cloud, you shouldn't find yourself in that situation very often. But you'd be surprised. A lot of big companies still have physical servers, and if a physical server fails and they have to order a new one, put the software back on it, restore the data from a 3-day-old backup, they will have lost 3 days of productivity. More importantly, though, RPO, recovery point objective, they will have lost 3 days worth of data. All those transactions that occurred from the time the system failed to the time they brought it back on were put in the system, and now that system is gone. I'm going back to a 3-day-old backup. What happens to those transactions? They're gone, unless I have some other means, some other record of that transaction having occurred. Most of us don't do that these days. So that's a really big risk. That's a really big risk for most companies. That gap between when the system fails and when it comes back on and I have to go back in time to get my backup and try to make that my current state, I've lost transactions. Or even if I have paper transactions or a record, if I can recreate a record of what we did, that takes time to put in. So you can't say the system is current, back in its current state, until all that has occurred as well. You can really run into some time issues here. I highly encourage use of some kind of a system, the cloud, backup, and do it frequently. You'd be surprised at the companies that do nightly backups only, which means automatically if they lost their backup at 11:59 and the new one starts at midnight, they just lost 24 hours worth of data. And there's no getting around that. That's permanent, unrecoverable data loss. That is anathema, should be, to any business. You just cannot tolerate that, and you don't need to these days. Wow, I sound like I'm really lecturing. You don't need to tolerate that kind of an RPO anymore. So this is kind of what it might look like. I usually create tiers of recovery or criticality. Like a tier 0 would be kind of an emergency management system. So all the emergency action planning, I've got to evacuate the building. I have a gathering spot or a rally point where I know everyone knows to go. I can assess who's here, who's missing. Are they in the building? Did they not come to work today? You know, what's the status of all of my people? All that sort of stuff. And how do we communicate? So there are a lot of emergency management or emergency communication, incident communication systems out there that you can put on your mobile phone. And you can set them up ahead of time, kind of like the code red. It will call, or it will email, or it will text, or it will do whatever you tell it to do until it reaches every individual in the list. And one of the methods that you set up. So tier 1 is the highly critical systems. You can see less than 24 hours. You can make up whatever or 4 to 8 hours. You can build whatever scale you need. Thank you. You can build whatever scale you need. Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Put each of your essential functions in one of those categories so that you know that's the one I need to deal with first. That's the one I need to deal with second, and so forth. Okay. Incident management recovery strategies. This is where we answer all those questions. So once I know what I'm trying to recover, how are we going to go about all that? What are all the working parts? I need teams. I need incident management and incident assessment. How do I know to declare a disaster? How do I know that I can't go back in my building? Who tells me that? Do I decide? Does the fire chief decide? Is it obvious? But who decides that I'm not going in my building today? And then I declare disaster. And what does it mean when I declare disaster? So when you declare disaster in your business, it needs to mean something. It should mean something different than business as usual. Or don't declare disaster, right? It means I'm going somewhere else, or someone else is stepping in to do a job, or I'm transferring a function to another location or to another company. It needs to mean something different than business as usual. So all that will go into the strategies of what will I do once I declare disaster? What will I do? What steps will I take? How will I go about recovering the key components of the business? Okay. And document your plan. You know, this is really important. This is just an example. This is a table of contents. You could see, you could have a 900-page plan pretty easily. We don't normally go that big these days, but you can get into a 100-page plan. I really like slim plans. I really like what I call BC at a glance, business continuity at a glance, where you don't need to thumb through, because you're not going to do that. You can't thumb through a big 900-page manual. You really need to know what you're doing ahead of time. and just reference technical data somewhere else. Perhaps I need to look at another document to know the steps for recovering that server, or how to get into the building that I don't have access to, or whatever it is. And lastly, test your plan. As I said, it's only a theory until you test it. And typically we use 3 types of tests. We use a tabletop test, just like this, which is what we're going to do. You sit around a table and you say, okay, today we're going to pretend like we can't go in our building. What do we do? And everybody starts to say, well, first, and discussion happens, and you're going to run into issues you hadn't thought of. You're going to come up with some ideas. You're also going to reference your plan if you have one and say, well, the plan says we should do this, and you're going to test that out. And then you say, oh, well, it didn't work there, so let's make note of that, and we'll fix that later. That's a tabletop test. There's also a functional test, which would be, you walk in and someone says, today we're going to pretend like the payroll system doesn't work. We pick a function, an essential function. The payroll system doesn't work, and today is payroll input day. What are we going to do? So everybody's scrambling. That's an all hands. You got to pay people. That's an all hands on deck. And then the last one would be a full-scale test where you walk in to the business and they go, sorry, we're pretending today like you can't come to work here. We need to exercise our emergency action plan and our business resilience plan. Here you go. So we're going to see how you do. That's a full-scale test. So that's a big deal. That's expensive and disruptive, and it's a really big deal. So I'm not saying you should do that. You might. If you're in a regulated industry, that might be a really good idea. You can also tabletop that sort of a scenario, tabletop test, that we can't come to the building, right? And so from an IT perspective, I do not encourage you to go in and hit the big red button in the data center and shut everything down, or pull the plug, whatever the case may be. I don't encourage you to do that and see what happens. Actually had a client that wanted to do that for their test. It was like, not me. I'm not coming anywhere near that idea. So just be selective in how you go about it. It is, for a small business, that's a big deal. So maybe functional testing of each of the essential functions over time is a really good idea. And tabletop test them first. But the adage, the rule is crawl before you walk, before you run, but start crawling right away when it comes to testing, okay? All right, so if you think back to a few minutes ago, I said there are 3 types of tests of business continuity, business resilience test. One is tabletop, one is functional, and one is full scale. We're going to do tabletop testing, hence the tables, and everyone gathered around. So we're going to give you a scenario that is very realistic. The scenario is yesterday, 5 a.m., you woke up to the smell of smoke in the air. That's what Machen said exactly what happened to him. He smelled smoke. You checked the local news and found out that several small brush fires have grown quickly while being fueled by high winds. The firefighters have yet to gain control. That's exactly what happened in his story. So this is kind of what we know from the radio or from whatever source of information that you choose to rely on. Maybe you're getting notified on your cell phone by Nevada County. Maybe you've gone to some other resource to check it out, local news, or you kind of know there are evacuations. Mandatory and volunteer. Well, voluntary, which one are you? Has someone knocked on your door and said you got to go, you have 5 minutes? Or are they voluntary evacuation so that you can get out ahead of any kind of a risk before the roads are cut off? Road closures to the area. Shelters are being set up throughout the county. So you know that we have a place to go. Cell towers and power lines have been burned. That did happen. Did that happen here in Nevada County where we lost cell towers? Yeah. Power lines have burned. The schools are closed. You just found out that your business is in the mandatory evacuation area, I'm going to say. You're not allowed to enter. So everything that you left there last night in your business, all the records, all the checks, all the transactions, all the soda pop, everything is still in the building, and you're not allowed back in. Now that is kind of the nightmare scenario, because immediately you're thinking about everything that's in the building, hopefully. Okay, so just some short-term considerations. This is what we call day zero. This is happening now. So do you have a plan in place to address these, and what does it cover? Do you have everything pre-identified, all those essential functions and what you'll do if you can't go back in the building? What's your first decision point? I can't go in the building. Do I just wait? Do I ride it out? Do I close? Do I try to recover some of the business, all of the business? Where? If so, where? So what's the state of your readiness? And do you have the ability, is that even possible for you to run your business from another location? All the components. How do you notify the employees or the clients? Or how do you notify suppliers? Anybody who's a part of your recovery process, in particular, though, your employees, your staff. The critical stuff, the payroll. How do I bank if I can't get my checks, if I don't have my checking account information? Staffing plan. Who's essential? Who do I absolutely need to come in if I'm going to relocate the business? What about this working from home? I mentioned that earlier, the VPN idea, remote access. How many people can we actually bring onto the system if the system is still there? Do you have money set aside? This is a big one. Do you have money set aside to pay for the rent, utilities, taxes, employees' wages, insurance, deductibles? We'd like you in your groups to have a discussion about your preparedness. And I know you come from different organizations and of different sizes, but have a discussion around what you would do in this scenario, in the first scenario where you simply are told you can't go in your building and you don't know if the building is okay or not. So take a few minutes and have just a discussion about some of the issues that might have to be decided in that moment when you find that news, when you get that news.
So let's dive in. What if you couldn't get to your building?
If we couldn't get there,
5 a.m.
we would start off with calling all the managers of the departments. There's a team of about probably 20 people, and try to get them together at a separate location. We don't have a particular plan in place for that right at the moment.
Do you have a current list of current home or mobile numbers for everybody?
We do.
Okay.
We do. And I have them all on my phone, and most of the managers all have them in their own
the
phones.
same thing on their phones.
So we could very easily pull all the managers together, and then all the managers could then communicate with their departments and explain what's going on.
Right. Right. How do you feel you are from an insurance perspective? Do you have business continuity insurance or?
I don't know the details on that, but I feel that I'm sure we're well covered, but I don't know the exact details on that.
Okay. And how about you in terms of reaching your staff? Do you have plans in place? And
absolutely.
Good.
Being in healthcare.
Being in healthcare, you don't really get the choice to not.
No, we would contact our leadership, which would go down to managers, to supervisors. Everyone would be in contact with one another if that was possible. We've got backup plans for plans. And then we would work to get a hold of our patients that we had scheduled, and we have off-site locations where we could do that and reschedule their appointments.
And is it a hospital environment or just a?
We're an ambulatory clinic.
Okay, so you've not got anybody there that you're going to need to evacuate?
Correct.
Okay.
No beds.
Right, no beds overnight.
I'm curious about records. I'm assuming that
Yes.
in the medical field, most of your stuff is up, that you're backing up, that records are online, that they're digitized, and so maybe there's not quite a rush to grab records, but what kind of things are in the office that maybe get left behind, or you haven't thought that someone should be bringing off-site?
We do still have charts. However, everything has been digitized. And backed up. So everything's been scanned, so pretty much if we lost our charts, we still have everything digitally.
We have a lot of stuff stored on the cloud and on our server as well, but and we also have all of our paper records stored at a separate location. It's still in town,
Right.
But it is at a separate location.
But yes.
So
Yeah.
Okay, so here's your update. Now, 3 weeks later, you're able to get back into the building to resume normal business operations. Well, that means your building didn't go up in smoke. That's a good news. Several employees, however, their homes have burned and they're living in shelters. Others have children whose schools have yet to reopen and they can't return to work because of that. There's still a strong odor of smoke in your facility that you can't get rid of because fires were all around. Anxiety is rising in the community, and I dare say within your business as well. Okay, so some new things to consider. Are you able to continue normal business operations using fewer staff? What resources could you make available to the staff to augment maybe the individuals, the people who aren't available, or the processes that you can't fully restart? Can you go outside of the business? How do you communicate your company's resilience to your customers? I mean, they may know by now that you've been out of business or shut down or partially in operation for the last 3 weeks. How are you going to notify them that, okay, it's all well. Thank you for your support. It's all well and good. We're right back where we used to be, and we're going to carry on. How are you going to notify them? And what if the suppliers are not able to resume their business operations? You know, their building may have burned, and they're your key supplier. Do you have a backup? So what are your strategies now for long-term recovery? Remember people, process, facility, technology, supply chain. What if your facility was damaged or destroyed? How do the employees get there if we're going somewhere else? Remember we talked about maybe you have to have a transportation plan just in case. And what are the procedures for restarting the company at another location? The sequence of events, all those essential functions, can we do without some of them? Or does everything need to come back if we're going somewhere else? I would like to go back into the groups and discuss now plus 3 weeks.
Do you have, and just before we broke, you were talking about your backup generators. Do you have backup generators
We don't.
for all your fridge
We don't.
stuff? So that you could look at some significant inventory loss
Oh, yeah.
from that perspective.
Yeah, massive.
Yeah.
The amount of space and cost for backup generators for grocery stores generally not done.
Doesn't pencil out.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So it's more cost effective to take a potential loss
Exactly.
than to provision
Unfortunately,
against
yeah.
it.
Yeah. And if you have time, you try to donate as much as you can, as quickly as you
Right,
can.
of course, if you can get
there's
into
time
it. Yeah.
to do that, and we've had to do a little bit of that from time to time, but
Yeah. Yeah.
same thing with a power outage. If we know we're going to be down on power,
Just
we
get
start
it out the
donating all
door.
the refrigerated stuff and
Yeah.
get rid of it. And,
Yep. And be a good citizen at the same time.
yeah, yeah.
Hopefully that was illuminating and maybe triggered some additional or new information from the first scenario. Would anyone like to share a discovery or an epiphany of some kind of an understanding that you came to?
I can't stress the importance of communication. Communication is huge. Having maybe a PIO in place that can make sure that that message that's going out is appropriate.
Public information officer.
Yes. Not just to your staff, but to outside, the outside community. So you want to make sure that it's correct, because as I think most of us know, news agencies, if they don't get some type of feedback from you, they will create their own.
Yeah, so communication is one of the linchpins of this. If the staff doesn't know what to do, you're not going to restart that part of the business. If your customers don't know that you're still in business, they may not even try to purchase your service or product. How about the staffing side, the people side? Does that really resonate, that if my staff is unavailable or their homes are damaged or they're having personal issues and can't come to work, what kind of impact? Big impact in many cases?
Well, we have about 250 employees, and we did have a handful that were affected by evacuations. I don't think we had anybody that actually lost their home. But we had a handful that weren't able to come to work for a while, and we were able to bring in more of our part-time people, add some extra hours to their shifts, and work a little shorthanded here and there, and just make it work.
I think our time is just about up. We do have, on our website, connectconsulting.biz, we do have an emergency preparedness checklist. It's sort of an evaluation, but not like the Red Cross's READY rating system. But this kind of tells you where you might have some weaknesses, where you might have some exposure, where you might want to shore up some of your internal processes around business continuity and disaster recovery. We've got some toolkits, some of which assessments and toolkits, some of which are at no cost, some of which do have a cost, but check us out if you like. All right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time.